We are continuing to scrutinise the podcast Making a Detective, episode 12, a podcast created by Ian Doyle and Stephen Breen in association with the Irish Sun. And as we've said before, it details the career of Senior Investigating Officer Mr. Pat Marry. Now, we have looked at a few aspects of the initial part of the podcast, number 12, and we're going to continue to do so. And initially, we're just going to revisit a little bit. We've already covered this, but we cannot emphasise enough how these clips clearly show that there's coercion, collusion, and something is not right with the way the whole investigation was handled in New York. So we're just going to listen to this very short clip.
Small quantity of steroids and a suspected cannabis plant concealed in a closet. But the detectives weren't interested in them. They only wanted information on Aaron Brady.
How's it going? It's Jake Humphrey here from The High Performance, and we can all go forward together.
A small amount of cannabis and steroids is found in Daniel Cahill's flat, and we are told very clearly, we're not interested in that, because we know that you know something. You must understand that this decision was made before the detectives knew anything about Daniel Cahill's knowledge about what Aaron Brady allegedly said. And it goes nice and quietly then, and then we go, and the next man we hear is Jake Humphreys. We go straight into the ads. Now, only for those ads, I am certain, well, maybe I'm not certain, that Mr. Doyle and Mr. Breen and Mr. Marry would have told us about Daniel Cahill being an illegal immigrant, Daniel Cahill hiding for 6 hours, allegedly, before he spoke to these police officers, about his machete attack, and about his association and his knowledge of criminal gangs and terrorist organisations in Dublin. Only we went to the ad there, I'm sure Mr. Doyle would have told us all those things. But we will revisit Mr. Doyle and Mr. Cahill again later on in the podcast. For now, we're just going to move on to a little bit more about Mr. Marry eulogising about himself, and we'll just have a little listen to that before we move on to the next aspect, intimidation. So we'll just have a brief listen to Mr. Marry once again.
Over 2 years went by before Aaron Brady's case would be seen in court.
But in that period of time, I remember before I left, and I made it quite clear that there was an issue of disclosure. It's going to be a huge and massive task to disclose everything to the defence. And I looked to put 6 people on it full time.
The amount of witnesses, statements, video evidence and other documentation was mammoth. All evidence the prosecution had compiled needed to be disclosed to the Brady defence team before a jury would ever see it. This included testimony from Pat himself.
I was hauled over the coals in the disclosure as a witness, and that went on for 2 months before the trial started, and the trial lasted 6 months. It was the longest criminal trial in Irish history.
Marry most certainly likes to sugarcoat the details he's giving about his interactions and his work in the case and during the course of the investigation. He mentions here a couple of things. First, he's talking about the disclosure, and because there was so much disclosure, he had to put 6 people onto it to oversee the disclosure of the evidence from the state to Aaron's defence team. And to give you some idea of the carry-on that went on in relation to disclosure, this is approximately, here we'd say, a book of evidence. That's one book of evidence. And on the 8th of October 2019, the date Aaron's trial was due to start, Aaron had 8 of those. Okay? By the 28th of January 2020, when the trial did start, there was over 40 books of evidence. So there was a concerted effort by the prosecution and the Garda Síochána to just bomb drop all the evidence at once, so the defence wouldn't have the capacity to go through the evidence and find vital information. And that is exactly what happened. And a lot of the evidence we've brought to you during the course of Aaron's campaign was in situations where contradictions, lies and coercion and corruption was only found at the 11th hour by the defence team. And we've gone over a multitude of incidents where that happened. And we've shown to you clearly during the course of Aaron's campaign. And Pat Marry also tries to tell us here that during the course of those first couple of months that he was hauled over the coals. And it sounds like he's trying to say that he was fighting the case himself in October, November, December. Most of that time was spent in legal argument in respect of vast quantities of information and emails that Aaron Brady's defence team never got. Now, we did get some of the emails and some of the correspondence and the interactions between the United States of America and Dublin. But there's vast swathes of it was never released to Aaron's defence team. And there was much argument over that, and it's not really what Pat Marry's saying here. Now, he was on the stand a couple of times, and I could bring several points of interest here in relation to Pat Marry's testimony, but we're just going to look at one. His mate here, Mr. Matt Katsky, and Pat Marry swore under oath that he knew nothing about Matt Katsky going to Suspect A, approaching Suspect A in Belfast Airport about a crime in the Republic of Ireland and by an American attaché to a London embassy. And Pat Marry wants us to believe that he didn't know that this man, Matt Katsky, was going round offering inducements and coercion people in relation to Aaron's case. Now that's just one wee part of it. I could make 2 videos on some of Pat Marry's testimony. But as always, that's for another day. So that just gives you another brief insight into Pat Marry's psyche. That little short clip is full of inaccuracies and has been exaggerated, obviously, to Mr. Marry's advantage. So that gives us an idea of, we're carrying that theme right through from the very beginning, from Pat Marry's absolute disdain for the authorities and the complete mess that the incident room was in. Pat Marry has told us that himself, and it's carried on through this podcast. So now we're going to move on to a very important part of the trial, and again we're going to show very clearly how Ian Doyle, Stephen Breen and the mainstream media in general tried to run with a story that the Bradys were intimidating witnesses in this case. And we will show that very clearly not to be the case. And then we'll move on to Molly Staunton and how that's completely brushed over. So we'll just have a listen to this clip now, please.
And it was certainly the biggest murder investigation the state had ever seen.
The trial got underway on the 1st of February 2020. No one envisioned the difficulties a pandemic would bring to the process. Much of the evidence based around this case was coming from New York, people that Brady had blabbed to during his stay. To put it bluntly, the trial was extremely messy from beginning to end. The prosecution were reliant on having as many witness statements as possible, but it's believed that up to 5 potential witnesses did not give evidence during the trial, potentially because of acts of witness intimidation taking place on both sides of the Atlantic.
Pat Marry tells us again, it is the biggest case in the history of the Irish judicial system, and we hear that the whole case, the whole trial, as was the investigation, is a complete mess and it's in chaos now because of the pandemic. But that was used most certainly by An Garda Síochána and the prosecution to create chaos. And then we have a situation where we have an investigative journalist here talking about potentially 5 witnesses didn't come forward, potentially because there was some form of intimidation. Now, if you're a senior investigative journalist and Pat Marry is the senior investigating officer, there should be potentially up to 5 witnesses didn't come forward. Once again, it shows very clearly that they're just creating a story. They don't know the facts. There should be a precise number there. And I will tell you the precise number. 0. There was no witnesses that didn't come forward because of any intimidation. The only witness that was intimidated that we seen on screen was Molly Staunton, and we'll deal with that in the next coming clips. So we're going to continue listening to this as they try to create the story once again that in some way us, the Brady family, were involved in some form of intimidation of witnesses, which never ever happened. So we keep listening.
Extremely long case, so it was a lot of evidence to go through. But what strikes me about it as well is throughout the process, and an investigation is still ongoing, there was a concern about witness intimidation. There was a WhatsApps going around of a video of a witness in America, which wasn't used in the trial, of talking about Aaron Brady's behaviour and what he had admitted to.
In what the presiding judge, Michael White, noted as the most outrageous contempt of court he'd ever seen, a video circulated on Facebook of a witness telling Gardaí he had heard Aaron Brady stating that he was responsible for the shooting. The video was taken down offline, only to resurface hours later, captioned with the words rat and tout.
The witness did not come forward to give evidence. He was one of 5 witnesses who did not testify in the trial at the Central Criminal Court earlier this year, during which there were repeated claims that witnesses were being interfered with and intimidated.
Upon hearing that there was very little that could be done on controlling the circulation of the videos, Justice White remarked it as a sobering day for the administration of justice in Ireland. Molly Staunton.
This story has been peddled by the mainstream media in ad nauseum since the end of Aaron's trial, that the Bradys were some way involved in intimidation and interference with witnesses. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I think that has been borne out now that I don't believe there's any further investigation into myself. I was allegedly arrested. I went in voluntarily to speak with the Gardaí in Carrickmacross Garda station. And indeed, while I was there, I was never accused of intimidating anyone. I was showing some information and videos. But one thing that was very interesting, Peter Woods, the detective who was interviewing me, showed me details that this gentleman whose video was released had drugs charges in America. This gentleman still remains in America. But let's get back to this, the WhatsApp video that was released. 2 weeks prior to that video being released, that gentleman in the video spoke with Aaron's legal team. And it was completely detrimental to Aaron that that video was released. I cannot make this any more clearer. The only person that video hurt on release was Aaron Brady and Aaron Brady's defence. The gentleman in the video believes, as we do, the person or the people who released that onto the mainstream media or onto social media was a detective originally stationed in Castleblaney and is now stationed in Dundalk. And that is that person's own belief, as it is with ours. Judge Michael White said it's the most outrageous thing he has ever seen during the course of any trial. But we'll cover that again when we go into the Molly Staunton aspect and her testimony. And then we have Paul Reynolds saying very clearly that this person didn't come forward because the video was released. Now, I just want to cover this again. The person was going to have to come forward anyway. Is that understandable? Whether the video was released or not was almost irrelevant, because the man was going to have to come forward and tell his story anyway. So it was an ideal situation for the prosecution to get rid of another fake witness. That's what we are saying. Now, to Mr. Breen, who seems to be studying this, he says it strikes him that all this was going on during the course of Aaron's trial. Mr. Breen, Mr. Doyle and Mr. Paul Reynolds. If you want to meet individually or collectively, I have on this phone videos of on Garda Síochána, members of Garda Síochána intimidating and threatening that same person on the streets in New York. Now, obviously, we can't go to the Garda Síochána with this because the Garda Síochána are the people who will be investigating it. Because it's their own members who was intimidating that same young man on the streets in New York. Not that very long ago. So, we're more than happy to sit down and I will show you the video and the texts. That's sitting there ready. So, if you are genuine investigative journalists and you want to get to the bottom of it, it's there. And a lot more besides. But it gets more and more difficult to listen to this bullshit day in, day out when I'm preparing the videos. It's upsetting for me, obviously, but it also upsets my family. And it's got to a stage, well, it's got to a stage a long time ago. But at this moment in time, listening to that bullshit is just, it's just almost too much. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on and compare what Judge Michael White says and the way these people, Doyle and Breen, now go into the Molly Staunton intimidation, what happened to Molly Staunton during her testimony from a kitchen in New York. Like, the whole thing is a farce. And compare what they're saying about the WhatsApp video release and a man standing shouting at a witness. It's unbelievable. And I know it's so difficult for the public to take this all in, but hopefully if we continue to show you what actually happened during the course of Aaron's trial, the public will get a good grip of what nefarious acts the prosecution and the Gardaí were getting up to. So we're just going to listen to the last little clip here now.
Staunton, the former girlfriend of Aaron Brady's roommate, was one of few witnesses to make statement at the trial who had heard him confess to the murder. Hers came from a video link because of the pandemic. That in itself brought the court into difficulty at stages throughout the trial. During Staunton's testimony, Prosecution Counsel Brendan Grehan was questioning her on what she had heard that night in the apartment. As she was just about to reply, she turned to someone facing behind her camera and said, "Can you leave?" A male voice disgruntledly replied, "You fuck off." Following up with, "Put a stop to it. You can put a stop to it right now. No more testimony." At that stage, the feed went blank, mirroring the faces around the courtroom. Michael White then directed the jury to leave as he tried to get a hold on what was happening.
There we have it, folks. It's there in black and white when we look at how Ian Doyle and Stephen Breen have reported on these two incidents. This is a single girl sitting in her kitchen giving evidence from New York to a court in Ireland, and there's a man swearing at her. They don't even mention that he slammed down the laptop. There was a physical attack on a witness. Mark Phillips, senior investigating officer, was sitting at the back of the court with two telephones in contact with Molly Staunton at that moment in time, when the court and the judge was trying to find out what was going on, and Judge Michael White through Brendan Grehan, and Brendan Grehan was speaking to Mark Phillips and saying could they find out. There was genuine concern for Molly Staunton's safety, and they brush over it in a couple of lines. It's absolutely ridiculous. This happened over the course of 2 days, the man being in Molly Staunton's kitchen. And Brendan Grehan, senior counsel for the prosecution, got up and told the court and Judge White that there would be no further investigation into the man in the room. Is that believable? And they went through the whole charade of taking myself into the barracks in Carrick And I was never questioned. I was never asked, did I contact anyone? They showed me a little bit of the campaign and went through some stuff that was on social media. Nothing got to do with me. Peter Woods actually showed, well, he didn't show me, he couldn't find me then on the CCTV footage at the court, but we were actually in the courtroom at Aaron's trial when the video was released. And again, if I'm going to repeat again to the journalists, if you want to come and look at the evidence about the intimidation, I have no issue with that. None whatsoever. We have absolutely no fears of any of that because we did not do anything wrong. All we are doing is looking for the whole story. And I hope that those two little clips there show clearly it's disgusting journalism. Absolutely disgusting. We had a video released that don't know where it came from or who released it, and yet we've a man standing shouting at a witness. And Mark Phillips just went, oh no, everything's okay, it's fine. And Brendan Grehan's happy with that. And Judge White was happy with it. So again, all we can do is keep highlighting, and hopefully that somewhere at the back of someone's mind there is a little bit of conscience as regards these journalists, and they'll print the whole story and not just a very curated and manufactured part that it's simply lies. It's more journalistic lies. So once again, thank you for watching the video again. Please continue to like, comment and share. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our social media sites have been attacked quite vigorously once again, and we really, really need everyone's help by subscribing and working against the algorithms or with the algorithms. I don't understand it fully. And we're going to move on and show another sugar-coated story about Daniel Cahill as the episode 12 of Making a Detective continues. Thank you again for watching, and we'll have another video out very shortly. Thank you.